A, did Donald Trump see you? Because I know he saw my colleague Lawrence O'Donnell, and what stood out to you?
He didn't see me because I was in the shabby overflow room, so I was across the hall from him. I think one of the things that we're going to see in this trial as it continues is there's just going to be an accumulation of the same kind of evidence, of the same crew of people doing the same nefarious things, and I think it's plain on their face what it's about. I don't think that there's much doubt at this point that they were trying to pay off people to be quiet. They were paying them off in order to get a foot up in the election. I think the issue is whether or not you go from the series of misdemeanors to a felony and election interference. And that's ultimately, I think, how the jury's going to land on this. But along the way, we're getting this very seedy tale about the underbelly of power and money and politics in New York City.
Okay. But is there any chance people hear that and say, well, that's just how nasty New York City big business works, right? Could it look like they're all just kind of no good guys, but not necessarily Trump's a criminal here?
Yes. I mean, I think that's where it all tips around is ultimately what's the impact of this case. And I think it's sort of an unknown. I think back to the January 6th hearings where people were saying American voters had forgotten about January 6th and they didn't care about it. And then once the hearings and the tale got out in public, it mattered to voters and it made them think about what those events meant. And I think this trial may not end up legally being consequential for Donald Trump. It could be, I don't know. But I do think every day he's sitting in there and there's this referendum on how he rolled as a husband and how he conducted himself as a businessman and what he was capable of. And I do think, at the end of the day, this election is going to come down to a small slice of independent and moderate voters in 6 or 7 states who I do think care about this stuff. And I think voters on the left and the right are already decided about where they're going to be. And cases like this are I think, consequential for that group of people. And what they're seeing is that Donald Trump is shabby. And Donald Trump allows a porn star to come into the offices at Trump Tower on the 26th floor of the building, which is 30 floors beneath his residence, where his wife was with their 4-month-old child. And that's the same man who's saying, I can't get out of court to attend my son's graduation. And I think they're weighing that for what it is, which is that he didn't really care at the end of the day about how his wife felt about any of these things. He did it anyway. And then once it came out into the open, he's tried very hard to bury it. And
not from his wife, but from the American voter.
From both.
Yes, yes.
From both.
Dave, Donald Trump has expressed that he's angry. He does not feel like his defense team is aggressive enough. He wants his Roy Cohn, omitting the fact that Roy Cohn was disgraced and disbarred. So if he were alive today, he would not be able to represent Donald Trump. Obviously, his team was the most aggressive we have seen today. You think that's a good move for them?
No, I didn't think they did well today because I think they missed the mark. They went after...
Did they do well any other day?
No, I think it's going well for the prosecution. But Keith Davidson is an important witness, and Trump's legal team went after him in a big way, saying that he and his client, Stormy Daniels, are extortionists. They brought out the E word. But I think that missed its mark because, remember, Trump is on trial for falsification of business records, and that allegedly led to another crime, campaign finance violations. Well, by claiming that he's a victim of extortion, it does not help his defense. It's not like magic fairy dust. You sprinkle some extortion over these charges and they go away. That's not how any of it works. And so I think in their zest to try to be aggressive, they didn't help the defense very much.
Judge Cordell, the lawyer on the stand, Keith Davidson, recalled worrying on election night that the hush money swayed the election. He actually texted the executive editor of The Inquirer and said, "What have we done?" How crucial is that point to the prosecution?
Oh, it's extremely crucial. So this whole trial tells a story. And the prosecution has its story, defense has its own story. So the prosecution story, everything is just building one thing on the next. And everything they can get, particularly text messages, phone calls, recordings, all of that is what jurors love to hear. So this was just a critical piece of the story that is building each day that this trial goes on.
Today, the jury heard a recording. They actually heard the recording of a conversation between Donald Trump and Michael Cohen in 2016 about the financing of the hush money payment to Stormy Daniels. How important is evidence like that, Dave?
It's important because one of Trump's key defenses is that he knew nothing. The Sergeant Schultz defense from Hogan's Heroes. And every time you can put Trump with knowledge.
You're really dating yourself here. Yeah.
I'm turning 53 tomorrow. So, yes. When you can put Trump in the room with Michael Cohen or in a conversation with Cohen and with David Pecker, then that shows that he had the knowledge. Now, the bigger question to me is, can you place Trump with the decision to falsify the business records? You got to get there. And that's the only piece of the puzzle I think that's missing. But stuff like this recording is powerful because people lie, but recordings don't.
I want to stay right on that point, Peter, because Trump's lawyers can attack Michael Cohen all they want. But when you've got a recording like this, it's kind of, you can't refute it. Could these primary sources make the difference in this case?
Yeah, I mean, the witness for the prosecution today was Donald Trump, right? It was his own voice. You can't, as we just said, you can't really refute that. And I think the more you hear his voice, the more it seems real. The more it's not just a tale told among a lot of different sleazy characters you may not find very reputable. There actually is, in fact, a main character here. The main character is Donald Trump. And it is not surprising that somebody charged with a crime is surrounded by people who may not be the most reputable people in the world. That's the bane of every prosecutor trying to prove a case like this. But juries time and time again have been able to make that distinction and understand that witnesses who are, checkered in their own past doesn't mean they're not telling what's really going on here. And there's a lot of, a lot of evidence here that Donald Trump tried to make sure the American public did not know about this, used money. And the question then becomes, as we said here, whether it becomes a felony, how much we can prove on the falsification of businesses. But I think on the main actions here, many Americans have known this now for several years.
Judge Cordell, I want to listen to what Donald Trump said on the campaign trail yesterday during his day off.
There's no crime. Now, I have a crooked judge. He's a totally conflicted judge. And I come, unfortunately, it's a 95% or so Democrat area. Other than that, things are wonderful.
Okay, first, let's just fact check for our audience, a Democrat area. The case is being tried in Manhattan because it is where the alleged crimes were committed. But when you were a judge, did you ever experiencing anything remotely like this from a defendant?
No. I was a trial court judge for nearly 20 years, and never, ever have I heard judges denigrated in this fashion. And it's really sad to me because there are a lot of people listening. Well, the world is listening, but Donald Trump's followers are listening to this. And some may be persuaded that why give any respect to the court system, to judges, to the process, when in fact an independent judiciary is the third leg of a democracy. You have the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And he is just repeatedly tearing it down constantly, which is why the gag order's in effect, but of course the judge didn't apply it to himself. I'm not quite sure why, because it's nothing to do about the judge being thin-skinned. This is really tearing apart his attempt to tear apart our judiciary. So the gag order, that's fine. It's trying to, in a way, to stop Donald Trump from doing this, but it's really ineffective because the punishment, at least as far as fines go, don't mean a thing to him. He's not being deterred at all.
Judge, I also want to share what Trump said today when he was asked if he would testify. And I want to remind our audience, he recently said, yeah, I want to testify. He's changing his tune. Watch this.
I'd love to answer that question. It's a very easy question, the easiest question so far. But I'm not allowed to testify because this judge, who's totally conflicted, has me under an unconstitutional gag order.
Not allowed to testify. I cannot even believe I need to ask you this, but for the record, can a gag order prevent someone from testifying? Judge Cordell?
No. And I think what Donald Trump has done is used the wrong word. He meant I can't talk to you about this. And he's using the word testify because he just is ignorant about the court process. And I think unwilling to really learn what this process is about and how things are done. So, no, of course, if he chooses to testify, that's his right. Even if his attorneys tell him, we don't want you to testify, they haven't proven their case, if he decides he wants to do it, he can testify, and he cannot be stopped.